Are you looking to get ready, be prepared, and transform your financial future? Then you've come to the right place. This is the Get Ready Money Podcast with Tony Stewart, where Tony has insightful conversations with financial experts who are changing the way we think about money. Catch up on the latest financial trends and hear practical advice from Tony and his expert guests so you can build healthy habits that work. Be empowered with tips for implementing small changes that can have a big impact on your financial future. So sit back and get ready to hear from today's guest.
Welcome to the Get Ready Money Podcast, changing the way we think about money. I'm your host, Tony Stewart. Today, I'm joined by Derek Hagen, author and financial behavior specialist at Money Quotient. We'll explore how financial behavior, life planning, and meaning all connect. Derek, welcome to the podcast. Great to have you here today.
Thanks, Tony. Happy to be here.
Yeah, excited for the conversation. So, to start off, tell us a little about your origin story and how did it lead to financial behavior?
So, origin story, that could be, I could pick any arbitrary starting point. Like, how did I get into the behavior and emotional stuff? How did I get into financial world? How did I just become me? So I'll just pick a random starting point. I was a finance person, heavy in the traditional CFA, CFP world, spreadsheets and calculators world. And I had started to think that there's more, like I wanted to learn how to listen better. Right? There was kind of some hoopla around advisors were bad listeners. And I thought, yeah, I mean, they are. I'm not. They are though. It's just a classic, right? I'm funnier than most people, and I'm a better driver than most people, right? And I'm a better listener than most people. So it got me wondering about how to listen better. I had already kind of gotten pretty good at decomplexifying things, making things simple, and I could, especially in this world of investments and allocations, I could make things digestible for people. But still, that's me delivering the message. That's the communication going from me to the client or me to the other person. So I felt like I had a pretty good handle on that, but I wanted to learn the other way. How can I be a better listener? So I started researching how to listen better. And in my head, in my naive head, I thought a good listener is just somebody who shuts their mouth and just hears what the other person says. But how do I hear better? It's like, because I was on this quest. How do I hear better? And the more I dove in, the more I realized that there's to learn. It's not just good listeners and bad listeners. I mean, I learned that there's active listening and empathetic listening and reflective listening and exquisite listening, and how there can be so many kinds of listening. It was frustrating because I just wanted to learn how to listen. Now there's 4 kinds of listening, probably more. So that was super frustrating. So then I came across a Journal of Financial Planning article written by Ted and Brad Klontz called Exquisite Listening. And in this article, they had this little throwaway line, something like, in our workshops, we teach participants X, Y, and Z. And then they continued the article without ever mentioning these workshops. This is back in the old days of the actual paper, so there's no links.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't tell me anything about them. So I went on this quest. It probably took me hours to try to figure out about these workshops. And anyway, finally found out that Ted Klontz hosts exquisite listening workshops in the country outside of Nashville, Tennessee. So 2017, I went and spent a weekend in Tennessee, rural Tennessee, learning how to listen. And that's when it really hit me that there's way more to this than just hearing. And so this is a crash course in psychology, neuroscience, philosophy, evolutionary biology. Like this is a whole mind expanding weekend. So that's the origin, I suppose, of how I even started to think about this kind of stuff. And then that led me to, they were teaching courses at Creighton University through Financial Psychology Institute, and I did that. And from there, I learned about Financial Therapy Association. And so I joined that organization. So that that was the weekend in July of 2017 that changed the trajectory of what I was reading about and learning about.
Well, that's awesome. And I think, for members of our audience who are working with clients, whether you're an advisor, a coach, an insurance agent, whatever role you have when you're working with clients, is listening, I think, is a superpower. And it's the
Yeah.
most, maybe it's not the most important tool you can have in your toolbox, but it's a super important tool. So, that's amazing. Yeah, Brad and Ted Klontz are doing some fantastic work. For people watching and listening, you've heard Brad Klontz on this podcast talking about some of these issues. So, I would definitely urge people watching and listening, keep listening to what Derek has to say and to think about how you can improve your listening skills. So, let's talk about psychology, because psychology is really growing in the financial planning community and talking about integrating psychology. So, what role do you feel that psychology plays in our financial lives?
Almost the entire piece. So that was another part of that transformation was I had thought, and I think most people think that doing well with money means somehow optimizing for the most money or optimizing for the most income or optimizing for the most savings or finding the best strategies and tactics. That's what I thought. It wasn't like I knew that there was even other perspectives and I chose this one out of all these other perspectives. I like literally thought this was what you're supposed to do. And the Clontzes, along with Rick Kaler, had their way of phrasing this was interior finance and exterior finance. So exterior finance is what I thought most of what I thought the whole thing was. So exterior finance is external, outside of us. That's the mechanics of money that I thought the whole money thing was all about, and that stuff's important. But if you think about a triangle, pointing up and dissect it horizontally, that exterior finance is the top piece and it's important, but it has to rest on the solid foundation of the lower piece of the pyramid, which is interior finance. And that's the new piece that I was learning. That's your relationship with money. That's the psychology, how you relate to money, the stories you tell yourself about money. And that you can have all of the exterior financial knowledge in the world, and it's useful if you're unable or unwilling to do anything about it. And so then here at Money Quotient, we have a different way of talking about it, but it's the same idea. We've got kind of this equation that MQ equals EQ plus IQ. So your money quotient is your emotional intelligence plus the IQ, your intelligence. And the EQ are your emotions around money, how you feel about money, how you relate to money, and plus the IQ. And the IQ is your knowledge about money. It's the strategy, the nuts and bolts about money. Note EQ comes first, right? Because again, you can have all the IQ knowledge in the world, but if you don't have the emotional aptitude, the ability to put that stuff to work, it's not actually helping you. So the psychology piece is the key that unlocks the door to the tactics and the strategies. So if you don't have the psychology down, you're not going to be able to implement any of these good tactics. And some of these are so easy, save more, spend less than you make, don't make any mistakes. It's the Dick Wagner formula. And but so many people don't do that. It's the same thing. It's not just money. I'm supposed to consume fewer calories, burn more calories, then I'll be super fit. But I don't, and most people don't. Why? Because it's not the information problem. There's something else to it, and there's the psychological aspect is like I said earlier, it's the key that unlocks that door that helps you implement the stuff that most of which we already know, and it makes it easier to implement or look and find the stuff that we don't yet know. But if we're not there, if we're not ready to do it, we're not going to do it.
Yeah, well, that's great advice. And I think back to my consulting career, and you give somebody all the information, and you have the recommendations, and you have all the backup, and it's completely the most logical thing to do, and oftentimes a no-brainer. But yet, there's the client or the advisor doesn't take up the advice, and like you said, it's not because a lack of understanding. It's not because of a lack of education. It's because it doesn't, for whatever reason, there's some other block holding them back. And, if you're a client and you've ever wondered why, well, why you're dragging your feet on something, or an advisor is like, maybe, it gets back to what you were saying, is the listening and trying to find out what's really going on and what that block is. Because it doesn't have anything to do with understanding or, well, so it was sometimes you may not be explaining things properly, but,
Yeah, well, think about it. There's three things that need to happen for change to take place. One is I need to think it's important. So if you could tell me that I need to lose the weight or I need to save more, but if I think that doesn't apply to me or I think that I'll make it up later, I don't think it's important, it's not going to happen. I also need to think that I can do it. I have to have confidence in my ability to do it. If you tell me that I need to go start running and I don't feel I'm a runner, I'm not going to become a runner because I don't think I can do that. So there's a problem there, maybe with the delivery, because you could have trained me up into running by walking first and then jogging and whatever. So I need to think it's important. I need to think that I can do it. I have confidence in my ability to do it, but I also need to be ready to do it. So I could think it's important and I think I could do it, but if I'm not ready to do it, I'm still not going to do it. And that piece is deceptively simple because we've got a lot of identity wrapped up in our money stories as well. And if you tell me that I should start saving more or I should stop spending money on this or that, that changes me. That changes what I'm doing. That changes my persona. That changes the masks that I wear. That's that's tough for people. Same with working out. That's just such an easy analogy to compare the two. If I start working out more and become fit, now I'm a person who's fit. And do I have my old friends? Or am I going to fit in with them anymore? Maybe. I'm not saying that I will or won't, but it's easy to tell myself a story that I'm not like them anymore. So now I have to find new friend groups or something like that. So I have to think it's important. I have to have confidence that I can do it, but I also need to be ready to do it.
Yeah, and I think that's a big key. And, I'm also thinking, for all the fintech founders who listen to this podcast, is that's an important lesson. It's not, that's why people may not be interacting with your app or returning to the app, is because, you're not helping them build that confidence and helping them really address what they need to address. And helping them recognize that they're ready. It's like you say, is like, I liken it to dieting. Everybody knows, they might have the goal like, hey, I want to lose more weight. It's like everybody knows they need to be saving more, creating an emergency fund. All these studies come out is like, hey, people don't have a big enough emergency fund. Well, yeah, and that's not the problem. People know they need an emergency fund. There's no secret out there, but they're not creating it for, as you point out, for a whole variety of reasons. Um, so, it's great stuff that you're talking about. One of the things you're involved with is life planning. Could you share, what is life planning and how is it different from traditional financial planning?
Life planning is answering the question, what's why? What are we doing? What's this money for? And there's a school of thought that we at Money Quotient believe is that life planning and financial planning aren't separate, but life planning is financial planning done well or done the right way. So they're not two separate things, but you have to figure out what are we planning for, and then we get the money, the financial strategies to support that. So I think Stephen Covey is the one who first came up with the ladder analogy. So it's basically if the ladder you're climbing is not leaning against the right wall, every step just gets you to the wrong place faster. I think he was first. In the British office, they also had a version of that where they said you don't have to be at the top of the ladder to be happy. It's better to be lower on a ladder that you're happy to climb rather than halfway up a ladder you don't want to climb. So life planning is figuring out where we're putting this ladder. and giving ourselves permission to change the walls if we decide to change. There's a big life transition, but making sure that we understand where we're going first, and then getting all the strategies of financial tactics to support that, to help you climb that ladder. And so we talk about this in well, we train people in different ways to have conversations. We talk about 4 different domains. We call them inquiry categories. But we talk about satisfaction and values, and we're teaching advisors how to listen for values. And this is different from saying, hey, what do you value? And we're talking about things like, hey, tell me about a time in your life when you just had it all figured out. What's been your favorite, the most joyous time of your life? And you tell me that story. And I'm learning to facilitate this conversation to get you talking. But what I'm listening for is the values underneath what you just told me. So satisfaction and values, that's one type of conversation. Another one is biography, and this is where we've been. So everything that we've seen and experienced has shaped our perspective today. So we're trying to learn, we're not crossing any lines into financial therapy here. We're not diagnosing and treating any disorders, but it is helpful to see how your experience has shaped your perspective. And most people haven't thought about this stuff before. So, and this is super powerful with couples too, because you'll hear things like, "I didn't know you went through that," or "Oh, that's why you do that." That kind of stuff pops up with biography conversations. Transitions are huge. Susan Bradley, if you've heard of her, she's a whole firm dedicated just to financial transitions or life transitions, and that just is basically the only constant in life is change. It's Rush and Tom Sawyer. Changes are not permanent, but changes. And most transitions have some kind of financial tether, some kind of financial component. And so we want to have conversations in a way that the client just talks about potential changes that might be coming up, so that I, as the advisor, can indicate any financial implications that might come with that. I don't want the client to have to guess. I think this might have a financial component. This one doesn't, so I don't want to talk about it. So we're having conversations in a way where they just give us all the information, and we're, in the satisfaction of values, they give us all the information. We're picking out the values and what brings them satisfaction. With the transitions, they're telling us all the potential transitions, and we're picking out the ones that have financial implications. And then vision and goals. That's really where we take all this stuff, your biography, who's made you who you are, shaped your values and your satisfaction, and based on that, where do we want to go? Where do we want to put this ladder? So that's a long answer to your short question, but if I boil it down, life planning is figuring out where do we want to go so that we can plan financially in order to get there, and recognize that we have permission to change the wall that we've leaning this ladder onto when things change.
Yeah, well, I think that's fantastic. And I think it changes the dynamic, especially, for people in the insurance community is like, for example, the majority of whole life insurance policies lapse within the first 5 years, like, I don't know, 90%, like a really significant amount. And it's because, people aren't, insurance agents aren't looking at the problem that people are trying to solve and, where they're coming from. They're just leading with the product like you're talking about, is they're leaning the ladder against the wrong wall. And I think that's a dramatic shift for the financial services industry. Is, I remember, the old days, for I was going to trade bonds, and it was like you had a set bundle of bonds that you had to place that day. Didn't matter what your clients actually needed. You had to commit to like placing that amount of bonds every day. And it was like, it had nothing to do with what your clients were looking for. It was just, you know, do you want to buy this or not? So, that's changing the dynamic. And I think this is a great shift for financial services, because then clients are going to be much more satisfied with the products and services that they end up with and the plan that they have, instead of going, hey, wait a minute, what did I buy? Why did I make this? So I love it.
Yeah, and think about that. There's nothing that we have talked about said that we don't need insurance, life insurance, or whole life insurance. It doesn't say that we don't need bonds. It just needs that we need to know where those products fit into life. first, right? So then we decide what products we need after we know where we want to go. So whereas we still can use those products, but now we know why we're using those products.
And especially the client understands the role of that product, down the road. I did some litigation consulting over the years and, some work with the California Department of Insurance. And that's what happened a lot of times is clients went, wait a minute, you sold me something that I don't need. And there's a problem with it. And, of course, they come after the agent. I worked in insurance, so it was always the insurance agent or the broker, the insurance company. And it was because nobody talked to the client about what they actually wanted, and they just shoved the product down the client's throat, for, to put it indelicately. And, that's been an issue for the financial services industry over the years. So it's exciting to see this change coming because I think it's going to really, this is what's going to make the industry professional, is really
Yeah.
listening to the clients. So I love it.
Yeah. And you can pin things to their heart. So when we get to our clients, we call them partners, when our advisor partners, when they get to plan delivery, we've done all this work, we've learned both qualitative and quantitative information about you. Every recommendation, we recommend our advisors pin everything or attach everything to the client. So here's what
Mhm.
I'm recommending. So as simple as open this account, and it's one of these inquiry categories. We're gonna have this bond ladder because, and then I'm gonna attach it to this goal that you wanted, or I'm gonna say we're gonna recommend this estate plan because family is important to you, or we're gonna recommend this because we're gonna recommend paying off this low interest mortgage because of your history with bankers coming after you and your family when you were a kid. So you're taking every single piece of advice and you're tying it to some reason that's specific to the client. So now they know exactly why you recommended everything. And I mean, I can tell you, but what you don't need you don't need me to tell you what that does for engagement, what that does for follow through, what that does for implementation. If now all of a sudden everything that you just told me to do has a reason and it's attached to my heart. It's not just brain anymore. It's not just the IQ stuff. You've hit it with the EQ stuff. And now all of a sudden I understand exactly how this stuff fits together into my life.
Exactly. And then you have a satisfied client and a client who's going to stay with you for years because they understand that you're taking care of what's really important to them. So just real quick, what is Money Quotient? What does it do? Who does it help?
We work with financial professionals, financial advisors mostly, but financial coaches and other financial professionals. And we teach them a model of financial life planning that they can implement. So it's a lot of training about the psychology of money, psychology of financial planning, and client communication, facilitation techniques. So our version of financial life planning, we call it true wealth, which is to say real wealth or true wealth is the true ladder that the client's going to rest this ladder, or the true wall that the client's going to rest this ladder on. And so we teach this process, and then we also teach how to do it. So there's a lot of people, or it's maybe not a lot, but there's more and more people who are teaching, here's what it is, here's the psychology, here's communication skills, but there's not that many people that teach you how to do it. How do you implement this into your practice? How do you have these conversations? We give you the recipes. Then the recipe means here's the order that we think you should have these conversations. Here's the depth that you should take these conversations, a little lower level, broad but shallow in the beginning part and deep in the later part. And just like a recipe, you learn to cook using the recipe, and then you can start to play with the recipe. Or maybe you keep the recipe, but with certain guests, you alter the recipe a little bit, but you know enough about the recipe, you know enough about the ingredients that you can mix and match. So that's the same thing. So we're teaching you how to do it. We're teaching you the recipe, teaching you the ingredients so that eventually you can play by ear, you can cook by taste, and have this actual true wealth process, life planning process, financial planning done well, implemented in your practice.
Well, that's awesome. And I think you're right is, there's so much information out there, but sometimes the actual information on how to implement it is missing. What are those actionable steps to do that? Not only with what you're talking about, but across the financial service board. That's a big thing. So, title of your blog is Meaningful Money. What does it mean to live a meaningful life, and how can people start working towards that?
There's a lot of overlap in a lot of the things we're talking about here. And so to live a meaningful life is to find out what's meaningful to you. And you can do that to loop Money Quotient back into it, is to go through your biography. What has felt meaningful to you so far in your life? And there's many ways to think through this, but what has been meaningful and how can you do more of that? And um, there's three components to a meaningful life. This comes from Michael Steger's work. He's a meaning in life expert. That's a branch of positive psychology. And so there's three components. One is purpose, and that's important because a lot of people will use these as synonyms. They'll say meaning and purpose, but that's redundant if you're saying meaning. That's like saying the fall leaves are beautiful in Minneapolis and also in Minnesota, but you didn't have to say both of those. So purpose is forward looking, future looking. It's having something meaningful to do with my time. So this is forward looking. Having a purpose is to have something to do going forward that feels meaningful to me. And again, that could be anything. There's a lot of commonalities. Other people is a commonality. Community is common. Friendships are common. So having something to do with your time, helping in the community, doing volunteer work, hanging out with friends. It doesn't have to be. It could be making quilts or anything. So that's the looking forward component. And then there's significance. That's kind of more present focused. I need to feel like life is important. Life is worth living. So I need to feel valuable. That's kind of where personal values fit in. It's hard to have it's hard to feel like you have a meaningful life if you don't feel like life is worth living. I mean, that sounds obvious when I phrase it that way. So how can I feel important? And again, having community, there's a lot of common threads that run through a lot of this. Make me feel important, contributing to something bigger than myself can feel important. So those two, purpose and significance, kind of make up it matters. Life matters. So I matter right now, and I've got something that matters to do with my time. Then the other component is life makes sense. So it has to matter and it has to make sense. And that's a sense of coherence, which is I've got a worldview that things aren't chaotic. I can kind of predict what's going to happen. It doesn't mean I always like what's going to happen, but life kind of makes sense. Now think of trauma, a traumatic event. Those are things that happen that don't make sense. How could this have happened? This isn't, I'm not supposed to get mugged outside of a bar at 4 p.m. That doesn't make sense, right? So these are things that rattle our sense of coherence. And then with time, we can grow that sense of coherence. Like we can start to make sense of bad things, but having a worldview that's kind of predictable, so it's hard to have a meaningful life if everything's chaotic and nothing fits, nothing happens like it's supposed to. So taking steps to have a coherent worldview are the three components. So life needs to make sense and it needs to matter both now and with something to do with my time going forward. And figuring out what that is for you, it's very similar to the life planning thing, which is where am I going to put this ladder? So that when I look back on my life, I can say that felt meaningful.
Yeah, well, what comes to mind, and I know this is something I've been thinking about personally, is what does this mean in retirement? Because in retirement, your purpose can change and all these other components, it's a real shock to the system. Do you have any advice for people who are thinking retiring soon, or advisors, because a lot of advisors are graying and their clients are graying along with them, for their clients who are going into retirement because they have to rediscover all those things.
Yeah. And so within these three components of meaning, we've got sources of meaning. Those are the things, the activities, the things that we do to fill up our buckets of meaning. And some of them are overlapping. So if I have a good friend circle, maybe I play pickleball, that's purpose because it's something that I'm doing with my time, but it also makes me feel important. So that's kind of a 2-for-1. I'm getting both purpose and significance in that. So what are your sources of meaning? So this is financial people are watching and listening here. We talk about diversification. So it's common for people to have an undiversified bucket of sources of meaning. So maybe I've only got one source of meaning. And if my sole source of meaning is my job, that could be valuable. That could give me a sense of purpose because it gave me something to do with my time. It made me feel important because I was maybe a leader in the world and I felt important. And what I was doing was in the world of solving problems and understanding how the world works. So my job maybe hit all three of those buckets, but I only had the one source of meaning. So guess what happens when I retire? I lost my only source of meaning. Right? So now I'm stuck. I got no sources of meaning filling up any of my buckets. It's not just retirement either. It could be, you see this with parents. My sole source of meaning is to be a good parent. And again, that's a good one because depending who you are, that could fill up all three buckets. But then the kids move away and now I'm not a parent anymore. So I've lost all of my meaning came from one spot. So I kind of try to think of it like this. If you've got, and I have to use kind of to paint a picture with words here. I like to draw a lot of pictures, so it's easier to do with pictures. But if you imagine like you're kind of up at the top and you've got your source of meaning, say work, is attached to you, and then all of your other meaning goes through work, then if you snip work away, everything drops. Or if parenting is the only thing that's attached to you and everything else is through parenting and you snip parenting away, everything else drops. And so diversifying the source of meaning is to pin multiple things to you so that if you snip one away, there's other sources of meaning that can take its place. And so that's the recommendation is to think about diversifying your sources of meaning before you have to, and to start to think through just visualizing, or what is life going to look like once I retire? What am I going to do to fill out my day? And actually think through it. And if it's golfing, that's such a common thing. I want to golf every day. Do you though? 7 days you're going to golf? Okay, and even if that's true, that takes up what, 7 to 11, 7 to noon? Now what are you doing with the rest of your day? So thinking through, and what are you doing with your partner, your spouse? Is that person golfing with you too? Or like how, have a trial run. This is kind of interesting idea too. Instead of say moving to Palm Springs and golfing all the time, maybe get a 1 month rental and try to live in there for a month and see how it feels. Or whatever it is. You want to explore the world in an RV, rent one and do a 2-week trip and see how you like being crammed in the tiny little RV. So try to think about how you're going to fill your buckets of meaning. Who are you going to be with? What are you going to do with them? And then have practice runs doing it.
Yes, I think that's wonderful advice either for advisors to help guide their clients into retirement, because I know that happens, within 2 or 3 months, people go, wow, this is not what I thought retirement was going to be like. And so that's a huge issue. So, let's wrap up with what I call the Get Ready Hot Take Trio. And these are 3 quick questions I ask all my guests to help people change the way they think about money. The first one is, what money myth are you trying to break?
That it solves all your problems or that it makes you happy. Now, I want to make sure that this doesn't get misunderstood. I'm not saying that money doesn't contribute to happiness, because you can use your money to fund happiness. And it obviously gets rid of misery, and alleviation of misery is a form of happiness, but it's how you use it that matters. And just having it isn't going to bring you any happiness. So if you say, I just want to have $1 million, that's great, but that's not going to actually contribute to any happiness. So how you use it matters, but the quest to get it without any other reason for it, this is my journey. I set out in my 20s. I grew up pretty poor, and so I thought the ticket to life, the golden ticket, was to make as much money as possible. Okay, that's great, and it does make things easier. I don't have to look at the how much money I'm spending at the grocery store. I mean, that's easier than having to tick and tie. How much can I afford this week, right? But easier doesn't mean happier. I know you had Matt Gorin on, and he says that more income will you make life easier. That's true. I think he said always makes life easier. I would challenge him on always bit, but notice he didn't say happier. He said easier, and easy and happy
Mhm.
aren't always the same thing. So money can't solve all your problems. In fact, it might solve the problems that you have, but there's not going to be problems that go away. I mean, you're going to find out that there's new problems the more you make. There's new problems the more you save. There's new problems. And those are just as you might call them first world problems, but they're still tough. And that's why you see people who've got everything that we from the outside looking in say you've got it all, and they're still miserable. And sometimes they do bad things. So it's not the ticket. It helps, but it only helps if you understand what you want out of life first.
Yeah, well, I think that's wonderful advice. And we can look at society and think of some of the billionaires in our country, and it doesn't seem like they're satisfied no matter how much money they have. It's like they're always striving for something else. So, that's wonderful advice. So, let's get out the time machine for a minute. What advice would you give your younger self going back in time, given what you know now about money?
So you're probably not prepared for this. I'm kind of an esoteric guy, and this is the old sci-fi thing of if you go back and you change one little thing, you swat a mosquito, everything changes in the whole world. So through that lens, I wouldn't change anything because I like what I'm at, what I'm doing. But to not cop out and to give you the real answer, um, it would be take more chances. Like embarrassment, fear of embarrassment runs like people are afraid of doing things, and most of our behavior problems, I think, is a short-term versus long-term problem. And our subconscious mind really is focused on the short run. So, for example, I don't want to get embarrassed. I don't want to look like a fool. So if I go introduce myself to somebody at a happy hour or something, and my subconscious mind says, best to take it easy here. You don't want to be made a fool. It worked because in the short
Hmm.
run, I didn't make an ass. I didn't make a fool of myself, right? But in the long run, I'm not going to have any meaningful connections. I'm not going to have any meaningful relationships. So getting comfortable with failure, getting comfortable taking chances is what I would tell myself. Take risks. And then you could even make this a risk and return thing. There's no potential reward without any risk. So I have to put myself out there and risk looking like a fool if I want meaningful connections. And then once you realize, and here's the trick, here's the real secret, is that nobody actually cares because they're too busy worried about themselves that they don't even care what you're doing. So that's literally what I would tell myself. That's what I'm telling my nephews. That's what I'm telling anybody who will listen. Take more chances, get comfortable taking chances, get comfortable, quote unquote, being embarrassed, and you'll realize that it's not even embarrassing. And you'll reap all the rewards for it.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful advice, and that's something that I would urge people as well. And like you said, is most people aren't even going to notice. That's the thing is, we
Yep.
think, oh boy, I'm going to look this way or that way, or like, whatever, and nobody's noticing, or
Right.
nobody remembers. It's like it's a
Exactly.
blip, on everybody else's, life, but it could make a huge impact in your life going forward with that opportunity that you miss because you're scared to maybe not scared. That's not quite the right word, but for whatever reason you choose not to take. So wrap up. This is the final question: is what is your number one tip for changing the way we think about money?
That you're telling yourself a story and it's probably wrong. So that's the high level. That's the high level. And what do I mean by that is this is goes back all the way to Stoic philosophy. It's not things that upset us. It's our interpretation of things. I think Seneca, Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus have all said something similar, and that eventually grew into cognitive behavioral therapy, which is to say that we have some reaction, we did some behavior or some feeling, and then we think about this trigger, but it's not the trigger that did it. It's our relationship to that trigger. So whatever money thought that you have, I'm not good enough with it. I'm not good with it. I don't deserve that. These people are bad. I deserve that. I don't deserve this. Try to ask, what story am I telling myself? And then I would encourage you to look for evidence for it. And look for evidence to the counter. How might I be wrong about this? So just slowing down this process and recognizing that we're telling ourselves stories all the time, and most of these stories are wrong. Most of these stories, back to the short-term thing, most of these stories are meant to protect us in the short run, but they're harming us in the long run. So if we can just slow down and see the stories we're telling ourselves, we can challenge them, and we can decide intentionally whether or not we're going to behave using that story or tell ourselves a different story.
I love that. Slow down, see the stories we're telling ourselves and how they impact us. Because I think that's something all of us miss, all over our lives is, we have these things and we're not really, and this gets back to what you were talking about at the very beginning is, the why are we doing this? It gets back to listening and everything. So that wraps us up, in a great way. So, Derek, where can people learn more about you? Check out Meaningful Money and Money Quotient.
So LinkedIn, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, so search for me there. I write a couple of blogs. So meaning.blog is where you can find Meaningful Money. This is written for the end user, consumers. So either for you as a person or your clients, these are articles written for people learning how to live meaningful lives. Life Planning Weekly, that's lifeplanning.blog. That's written for advisors. So how do you facilitate this for your clients? And then you can learn more about how we teach this to financial professionals at moneyquotient.com.
Fantastic. And if for everybody watching and listening, as always, there will be links to all these things that Derek mentioned, so you can check out his work and check out Money Quotient and everything. So, Derek, thanks for joining us today on the Get Ready Money podcast.
Thanks for having me. It was fun.
Yeah, this was a fantastic conversation. And thank you, everyone, as always, for tuning in to this episode of the Get Ready Money podcast. If you learned something today to change the way you think about money, please be sure to share and subscribe. You can also go to my website, tonystewart.com, to join the Get Ready movement and get access to my free resource library. Until next time, let's change the way we think about money.